So we definitely need more research to fully explore when and how this type of activism works and what can make it more or less effective. But it is clear that social media can be used to affect change. Large-scale, well-known examples of this include the impact of Twitter on the Arab Spring, the use of social media to mobilize during the Occupy Wall Street movement, ways in which social media were involved in large-scale change in a way that we've never seen before. There are also hundreds, probably thousands of examples of lesser well-known cases where online petitions, blogs, Facebook posts did work to create change. Also, I think the use of social media does raise awareness about issues in a way that really never had other forms of technology that can do it in the same way. The ability to spread the word about a topic quickly and to massive groups of people around the world is really unparalleled. And so some scholars might argue that raising awareness isn't activism. I think that it's really important that we not discount the necessary role of making people aware of social issues and providing them with information about what is going on in order as a really important first step toward creating change. These two quotes are taken from students who have participated in courses and programs with me that are designed to teach them about the representations of girls and women in the media and to talk about social activism. In the work that I've done teaching high school and college-age women about media literacy, I often highlight the importance of media activism. When I was in college and took media literacy courses, we did discuss the possibility of changing media, but that was really mostly through writing letters to the creators of media, trying to get them to change things. And the focus of these courses was predominantly on changing the way audience engages with media. Today, it's definitely still important to teach critical thinking skills and to discuss how and why people make choices about the media that they consume. So what impacts someone's decision to buy a particular magazine or to shop at a particular store or to choose not to do those things as a way of expressing their opinion about them. But technology has also allowed us to shift the conversation about media into really emphasizing that now youth have the ability to make alternatives to media. They can use social media really to flood the internet with the images, ideas, and messages that they create, the things that they want to see, and not just being subjected to those that are developed by others. So while it is definitely true that many youth activists utilize social media and maybe feel more comfortable with or familiar with the use of social media, they describe activism as being much broader than that. This list here includes themes generated in a research study that I conducted in which high school students were asked to describe and define activism. And you can see from the themes that they include both the ways in which students defined activism, like what is it, what is activism, what does it do, and the activities that one might engage in that they would call activism. So if you want to do activism, how do you do it? And this list shows that youth, and at least those in this particular study, define the confounds of activism rather broadly. It includes both engaging in protests and providing information or facts to others. While the definitions in this study may not fit with the ways that scholars have traditionally defined activism, including, for example, donating items or raising awareness, it shows that some teens see all of these kinds of activities as potentially serving the same goal. Understanding activism as being multidimensional and being willing to define it broadly allows for more individuals to possibly see themselves as doing the work. Young adults, and adults for that matter, who think that activism, the only way to be an activist is to go to a protest, may not find an avenue for themselves. They may not ever engage in social change work if that one type of activism doesn't feel authentic or meaningful to them. Instead, if we see activism as being only limited by one's imagination and drive, as this student describes, we open the door to a world of possibilities. Everyone who's invested in making change can find a way to use their voice and be engaged. As a scholar, I'm of course interested in finding shared meaning, quantifying phenomena, being precise with definitions. This allows us to do research and discuss constructs. But my goals as an educator and an activist pull me to see activism as inclusive. And I've grown more comfortable with expanding the definition of activism in order to allow more individuals to find a place in the work. One of the most important lessons I've learned in my work with children and adolescents is the need to stop underestimating kids. I think this is really essential before we can even approach the possibility of engaging in activism with youth or understanding youth activism. And really, adults underestimate children much more often than we realize. I think that it's not often malicious or intentional, but it can create barriers to doing truly collaborative activism with youth. Unfortunately, within psychology, my field, in a lot of ways, we've really codified and theorized this underestimation. And when it comes to social justice issues and activism, psychologists very often make assumptions about children and adolescents regarding their ability or their interest levels in these topics. Many of our developmental theories, although not all of them, suggest that children are not particularly concerned about identity or social justice issues, especially at a younger age, that their awareness of that doesn't really come until late childhood and into adolescence and adulthood. And they assume that children are really only capable of processing the information at certain developmental stages. In my work with children, as young as 7 years old, I've really been surprised by the level of self-awareness that they have, their recognition of social issues and their own identity, and a desire for change, an awareness that some of the ways we do things is not ideal. In one study that I conducted with high school girls, I asked them what they thought were the most important social issues facing young women today. These were some of the themes that came out of their responses. And remember, these are 14 to 16-year-old girls. So I think that to really explore youth activism, we need to create a space where we allow ourselves to really see what youth are capable of and what they are really aware of and what they care about, and then be able to challenge them and support them in meaningful ways. And this young woman in one of my studies really pointed out that the things that children and adolescents are struggling with are the same problems that adults face. Children's lives are directly and indirectly impacted by the patriarchal system that's institutionalized prejudice and discrimination. And although this particular young woman was very familiar even with the terminology, and that not all children might be, I think that they are often aware of the issues, even if they don't know the language to describe them. Not all 11th graders know the term Islamophobia, for example, but they're probably aware of the phenomenon. The Occupy Wall Street movement was dominated by youth activists. While there were certainly participants of all ages, many of those marching and engaging in sit-ins during the movement were millennials. They were frustrated with the current economic and political system and wanted to be part of fighting for social change. This fact, the youthfulness of the movement was actually often used to try to delegitimize what was happening. Many people said that it was just about lazy kids who wanted to do drugs and hang out in the park. People said, oh, they should just go get a job, despite the fact that many of them were saying they were trying to get a job. But a lot of people were able to hear their message and move past some of these criticisms. Other youth activists have been engaged in anti-war movements, environmental campaigns, projects to increase educational opportunities to girls around the world, and so many others. One of the young women that I work with in Pittsburgh has worked to raise awareness about the war in Syria. An undergraduate student at my university turned her own experiences of sexual harassment and stalking from a coach into a campaign to change the Pennsylvania laws. Her amendment that is referred to as Sarah's bill would allow minors to get protective orders and kind of close a loophole in our law. And the amendment was approved to be added to the bill, and the bill should be up for a vote soon. So while youth activism often targets large social structures and change on these large-scale issues, it also can take place in day-to-day life in ways that I think we don't often recognize and rarely refer to as activism. One of the big problems that faces children and adolescents today is a phenomenon called identity-based bullying. These are experiences of harassment in which a student is targeted simply because of their membership in a particular group or their perceived membership in a group, and where their experiences really focus on that aspect of their identity. Many of our research studies suggest that the vast majority of bullying incidents in schools in the US and other countries are probably related to aspects of identity. Students of color who are targeted because of their race, ethnicity, or nationality. Kids being teased because they don't fit in, or because their parents can't afford name brand clothes or the latest iPhone. Students being made fun of or ostracized for having a physical, mental, or emotional disability. And students being harassed for being gay, or being perceived to be gay, or because they don't conform to traditional stereotypes about masculinity or femininity. Identity-based bullying can take many forms, and the consequences can be enormous. This bullying includes teasing, ostracism, and sometimes physical violence. It can lead to decreased self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and even suicidal thoughts, attempts, and completion. Many schools have implemented programs to try to address bullying, but often these programs rely on a traditional understanding of bullying, the image of a big kid picking on a little kid, and rarely do the programs actually address issues of identity, discrimination, prejudice. So while these programs have good intentions, they're not always working with the reality of what's happening. But there are kids who are addressing these things, who are aware of discrimination that's happening in their schools and are trying to speak out through bystander intervention, forming gay-straight alliances, and developing other school-wide activities to end discrimination. And in many ways, although this type of activism is focused on the day-to-day life, it helps to change the entire atmosphere of the school and the system. One of the programs that I administer in K-12 schools teaches children about social justice issues. Within the program, we talk about ways that kids can support each other and end discrimination and identity-based bullying. My experience administering this program is that children are very aware of these experiences, even though they may not have had a language to speak about them until we have these dialogues and workshops. But like this boy who commented on how he thinks that kids should treat others, even if they don't conform to traditional gender role expectations. Children often use these workshops and these conversations as an opportunity to see how they can create social change, that they can interrupt daily experiences of discrimination. They can change their own behaviors, they can change the atmosphere within their classroom. And they really see these opportunities and are excited by the possibility of things being different than the status quo. When it comes to activism, regardless of the age of the activist, one cannot always predict what's going to be or not be effective. It's important to support youth activists in realizing that their efforts may not always be fruitful. They might not get the results they were hoping for, and to prepare them for the possible struggles they'll face. In my work with youth, I often tell them that I consider myself to be an optimistic realist, and that I strive to balance my belief in the possibility of large-scale social change with a recognition of the reality of a particular situation and the limitations within it. I believe that the creation of a just society is possible. I see that possibility on the horizon, and I spend each day thinking about how I can move toward it. And I recognize that it may not happen in my lifetime, but I think about how the choices that I make can help me get closer to that reality. We don't always see the results of youth activism. Sometimes the work they do plants a seed that takes years to grow. Sometimes an action is like the pebble in the pond. The ripples create an effect that's much larger than one could imagine, but we don't even always know about those changes. When I teach counselors, master's level counselors in training about diversity issues and talk about ways to engage in advocacy and activism work, they often want to know exactly what to do. They want a formula about how to be impactful, how to never offend anyone, how to always say and do the right things. And what I do is encourage them to be intentional about the choices that they are making, to care about the results, but to also care about the process that they're using to try to achieve those results. I tell them that they will make mistakes, that not every step they take will result in the kind of change that they are hoping for. But if we shift our focus from intentions instead of outcomes, then it changes the way that we approach the work. And that we may not always know whether this work will be effective, but as Gandhi said, if you do nothing, there will be no results. So it is important to not always focus on the end results, but I think it's also important to recognize that youth activism can be incredibly effective, and there are numerous examples of ways that their work have made changes. Here I have a list of just a few of the many organizations that are doing work with youth activists and really working to create social change. Media coverage of youth activism predominantly focuses on stories about a few individuals. Many of you have probably heard the name Malala. Some say that she is currently the world's most famous teenager. And some of you have probably heard of Julia Bloom, who's pictured here. She has been showcased as the face of the Spark campaign that worked to get 17 magazine to change their photoshopping policies. Both of these young women have been interviewed for numerous media outlets, have received public recognition and admiration, and have often been called exceptional for their work. While these two individuals have done outstanding work to fight for social change, they are not alone in doing this. In her book, Rebel Girls, Jessica Taft explored the theme of exceptionalism as it relates to youth activism. She examined how many of the activists she interviewed really took issue with being considered exceptional. At first glance, this seems strange. In our language, the term exceptional is often used as a compliment. Who among us would not like to be called exceptional? But if we take a moment and step back and think about what the term really means, it becomes more clear why it is problematic to refer to youth activism in this way. The term assumes that youth activists are the exception. It sends a message that not all young adults are, can be, or want to be activists. It sends a message that youth activism occurs in isolation, that people do these amazing things all on their own. And while it is certainly true that activists face opposition and engaging in activism can lead to being disliked by some people. This exceptionalism can send a message that activism is isolating, and it doesn't have to be. The message that youth activists go it alone can actually turn some people away. That's not the life that they want to live. So challenging the idea of youth activism as being exceptional is not about diminishing the accomplishments of the individuals who are doing this work. Rather, it is about honoring the work that is being done in groups. It's about relieving the pressure that's often placed on activists. The idea of being exceptional can make one feel like they have to be perfect and they have to do it all on their own. And it's about valuing the support that comes from working with allies. So while youth activism is often amazing and inspirational, it's not exceptional. In fact, most youth activism occurs in collaboration with others, including peer activists, adult activists, and allies who support and provide scaffolding. Julia Bloom has spoken out about the way the media has misrepresented her experience of activism. In one interview, she said, I quote, "I was the one who wrote the petition, but getting 86,000 signatures on it was the work of all of the Spark movement members and our 60+ sister organizations. Whenever I was interviewed by the press, I always talked a lot about Spark, but they always ended up cutting that out, and that really bothered me." End quote. Spark includes dozens of girl activists, adult allies, and countless partner organizations. When they put a project together, they do so as a team. I recently met the executive director of Spark at a conference, and she talked about this work and how Spark has really fought to get media coverage that is more accurate and acknowledges this collaborative nature of their work. There really is a terrible irony that a campaign designed to address media representations has been photoshopped into the message that others want to tell. So while at first it seems like a compliment, the reality is that presenting youth activism as exceptional is a way to dilute it, to make it less appealing, and to make it less threatening. Because one young woman fighting for change is a human interest story, but hundreds of youth working together for social change is a movement. In my experience, the most successful and fulfilling youth activism activities have been those that occur within a framework of collaboration. And this is the approach that I try to use in my own work. Unfortunately, there's no perfect formula for this, and I often refer to it as a lens, something that we use to just the way that we see the work that we do. The approach values the perspectives, experiences, and voices of the children and adolescents who are doing it, along with adult allies. It's based on the belief that working in a collaborative manner will be more effective than behaving as outsiders looking in. Collaborative activism with children and adolescents is founded on principles of participatory action research. It's based on the belief that to make real change, we must acknowledge the areas where some perspectives have been given value over others. In addition to the potential areas of privilege or oppression that individual children and adolescents face as members of various social groups, kids' voices are often given lower priority compared to those of adults in their lives, which can include parents, teachers, administrators, helping professionals, law enforcement, and sometimes adult activists. The PAR approach of engaging multiple voices in definitions of problems, discussions of solutions, and examining systems of power provides a foundation for an approach to activism work with youth. During one of the women's studies electives that I teach, college women work with students from a local all-girls high school to learn together about media literacy and media activism. Before going to this high school, the college students read articles and reflected on what it would mean to develop empowering connections and collaborative relationships. And these are quotes from some of the students in that project. And as you can see, they really talked about how collaborative activism includes valuing all perspectives equally. Also, many of them talked about how they found that it brought something new to the work, and it changed the way that they were thinking about it and really added something. In her work with adolescent girls, Lynn Brown uses the term muses rather than role models to define the role that college students play when doing activism work with elementary and high school students. The role of the muse is different from that of the role model. The role model is often expected to be an unrealistic version of perfection, something that no one really can attain. Again, these are quotes from students who participated in the Activism project with me. And in addition to talking about collaborative activism, they talked about their reasons for resisting the idea of being a role model. And if we allow ourselves to move beyond the conceptualization of activists as exceptional and then being role models and being perfect, can really be freeing. It allows individuals to find a way to be genuine in the work that they do. And this authenticity is a vital aspect of engaging in collaborative activism. It's pretty hard to be authentic and a role model. Collaborative activism with youth does not mean that we should treat children and adolescents who are working with us as our peers or as friends. And adults in the helping profession, psychology, often learn to distance themselves from youth to ensure that they're keeping good professional boundaries. Engaging in collaborative activism means navigating appropriate boundaries while also creating space to be affected by the work, being authentic in the space, and connecting in a meaningful way. In her article, Mentoring on the Borderlands, Creating Empowering Connections Between Adolescent Girls and Young Women Volunteers, Ruth Nicole Brown discusses her own experiences working to, and quote, empower adolescent girls. She describes her transition from approaching her work as being in a dichotomous relationship into being in a collaborative relationship. In my own work, I seek to develop these collaborative relationships and to teach young adults to do activism from a collaborative approach. In order to do that, I've worked to challenge traditional conceptualizations about power dynamics that can often be involved with the roles adult versus youth, teacher versus student, mentor versus mentee. This doesn't mean that I abandon all boundaries or that I hold no power in my positions. Rather, I've learned to acknowledge the power that I have and to find ways to have power with rather than over others. This quote is from a student who took my undergraduate course on youth and activism. Like many of her classmates, she was initially skeptical about the role that adolescents and young adults could have in creating social change. She dismissed the possibility of being an activist because so many adults had dismissed her. In the course, she was provided with structure to explore and challenge her ideas about activism, along with support and belief in her ability to be an activist. As a professor, it was important that I conveyed my faith in youth activism, that I was authentic about my approach to activism, and that I was not simply discussing it as academic material, but that I truly believed in the value of youth fighting for social change. Simultaneously, my role of teacher was important. I was able to share expertise on the topic, provide students with new information, and challenge them to think critically. This allowed them to expand their worldview and to meet them where they were, but also give them a push to think about things in a new way. In this way, I really worked to provide them with these boundaries without providing walls. Finally, I think it's important to recognize that youth activism transforms the activist. When we can move away from focusing simply on the direct results of each activist act and assessing things in that manner, I think we are able to see the way that activism work does change and impact systems and other people. But sometimes this work begins and ends with the work that activists can do to change ourselves. By engaging in activism, we give of ourselves like really nothing else, and that has the power to transform all of us. When talking about youth, I think this second quote is especially important, that children and young adults recognize that by learning about activism and social issues at a young age, that changes the way that they grow up and impacts the person that they become as an adult. And I think that this quote is very interesting in the way that the student talked about the ability for that change to pass down through generations, that by being impacted as a kid, one then goes on to impact their own children or other children in their lives as an adult. Well, thank you all for listening to some of my thoughts and lessons about activism, and I would love to hear any questions that you have about the information or about the projects that I referenced.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brinkman. Let me see here. Let me get rid of that echo a little bit. Want to remind everybody that if they have some questions, right now is a great time to type those in. Let's see, I did have a couple that were coming in. Jason Lucciarelli had a question mostly just pertaining to what is neutral bullying policies. You spoke of that a little bit.
Unmuted.
Sure. So a lot of the anti-bullying work that is happening in schools addresses power, but often in a framework that's not talking about identity. So they don't explicitly talk about race or ethnicity. They don't explicitly talk about social class, gender dynamics, sexual orientation. So sometimes the programs might say that, well, kids who have more power or social capital, without really defining or explaining that, might then pick on other kids, or kids might use bullying to try to access power and social capital. And it's not that these programs are bad or are ineffective. I think there's research showing that they are effective in addressing certain kinds of bullying, but they aren't necessarily targeting bullying that's really about social identity and prejudice and discrimination that both is impacted by the larger social system, but also then goes on to impact that. So in school, if you learn it's okay to use derogatory terms about somebody, and that's not ever challenged, then as children grow up and become adults, you know, it's not surprising that they may go on to keep using those terms. So these sort of neutral or decontextualized anti-bullying programs are doing some really important work, but aren't necessarily capturing everything that's really going on.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Rainey asks, in a course with undergrads that work with high school students, how do you go about selecting an issue or campaign with the students?
That is an excellent question, and I have done a few different approaches. Most recently in a project that I did, I decided that that would be our first topic, was to talk about what did the students want to focus on. And that I felt it was really important that I not come in as the instructor, either to the college students or the high school students, and say, this is what I care about, this is what I think we should address. And really went in, and the first workshop was asking the students, what do you think are important social issues? And so in this recent project that I did at all-girls school, we listed a bunch of topics, and then we talked about in the year that we were going to work together, picking 3 or 4 that we were going to try to focus on and come back to. And within that work, one of the things that I think was important was knowing that even if we were focusing on these 3 or 4 issues, that the skills and the tools that we were working on could apply to lots of other things. And so, but it was really important to me that the students, both college and high school students, felt like we were addressing something that they cared about, that really mattered to them. It's not always possible to do that, I think, depending on how much time you have with a particular group and how much prep work you need to do in advance versus you can do sort of as you go. You might come in with a more defined issue, but again, I think being responsive to what parts of that are the students actually interested in, and how can it apply to their life. Otherwise, I don't really like to waste my own time or their time doing something that they don't really care about.
Thank you. Toby Treat has 2 questions. The first part is, how can someone get involved with these groups of activism? And part 2 is, what are the steps to take to address bullying?
Great. Well, I think how people can get involved. One of the great things about social media is that you can be involved in a campaign that doesn't necessarily have an on-the-ground office where you live. So there's lots of ways to engage through the internet, doing webinars, to be involved in campaigns. So I would encourage people to check out the websites, the programs that many of the programs I listed have lots of ways to join on to campaigns, to sign petitions, to take some of the work that they do and bring it into your location. So, for example, Spark has a lot of ideas about activities that you can do, and one thing that they sometimes do is go into stores and place post-it notes, kind of presenting counter messages to something. So you can do that in your own town. So even if there are other people who are doing Spark there, you can really start that. You can get other people involved. So I would encourage people to see what's available and then also check out what's going on locally for them. In terms of preventing bullying, I believe that was, you might have to read the second question for me.
Yeah, it said, what are the steps to take to address bullying?
Okay. Wow. So I think that bullying is a pretty complex issue, and really requires work on a one-on-one level, but also some institutional work. So a lot of the stuff that I do looks at bullying within schools, although certainly bullying is happening outside of the school framework. Cyberbullying is a big issue. So I think in terms of what somebody can do is, first of all, be informed. There's lots of books and websites, and someone can, even just getting a little bit of information about what is bullying, what contributes to bullying, and then speaking out. A lot of the work is looking at bystanders and why bystanders say something or don't say something, and really the power that a bystander can have. A person who is experiencing bullying may not always feel like they're in the position to fully defend themselves. They may feel that not defending themselves is better. It might, rather than escalating a situation, that they try to sort of diffuse it. And so bystanders can really play an important role in stepping in. So taking bullying seriously and being willing to say when something seems like it's hurting somebody and it's bullying. So thinking about those individual levels, and then also looking at if there's a particular institution in which bullying is happening, what are the policies that they have about bullying? How do they address it? How are they educating people about bullying and what to do with it?
Excellent. Dr. Brinkman, that looks like it's all the questions.
All right.
And I want to say thank you once again for joining us for the webinar, and thank everybody else. This webinar will be up on our YouTube channel probably by tomorrow. We'll make sure it's up there by tomorrow. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with friends, we'd love to do that. We'd love to have you do that. Dr. Brinkman, thank you once again for sharing your time with us and your knowledge.